Good evening, everybody. Our role is to simply welcome you and to quiet the room so you can actually hear the people you really want to hear this evening. So we're going to be very quick.
Yep, great. Hi, I'm Brande Stellings. I'm class of 93. And this is my partner in crime, Marissa Wesely, who we've adopted as a member of the class of 93. So I have the fun job of thanking people, and this part is really important because it truly takes a village. And so we want to thank so many people that made Marissa and my job very easy, starting with a big thank you to our inimitable co-chairs, Stacy Austin. If you're around, please stand. And Lori Lesser, who I think had to go back to the city for client work. I know, and then I also want to thank the rest of the program committee. If you could please stand. There are many of you. And, yep. Great. I don't know if people have had a chance to look at these amazing poster boards. I have to say that I did not until I knew I was going to thank the person who provided them for us from SCAD, and Maura Grinolds-Berry. Some of you, they're worth looking at because there are embarrassing yearbook photos of many of you in this room. Stephanie Roth, I saw your yearbook photo. Yes. Yvonne Campos, I saw your yearbook photo. So it's definitely worth taking a look to see them. I also want to thank our phenomenal 160-plus speakers. You know who you are. You all were amazing. I had so many problems choosing. The ones I saw were incredible. And I also want to thank the great restaurant associate staff. We've had great food and wonderful service today. We're very grateful to everyone, but most of all, we are deeply grateful to our dear friend, Karen Chance Mercurius. And her fantastic team, Uta, Jackie. Are you guys out there, Uta and Jackie? And the rest of the Alumni Center staff. Thank you.
We're thrilled. We're thrilled to see all of you here. We hope you've had the opportunity to take advantage of panels and the workshops, and that you've been inspired by the speakers and by your incredible colleagues. We hope the time together you have together has deepened your friendships and helped you make some new connections. None of this would have been possible without the founders of the celebrations, which started with Celebration 25. And I'd love the organizers of Celebration 25 to stand to be recognized. Nor would this celebration be possible without our 22 generous sponsors. And in particular, we want to thank Paul Weiss for sponsoring tonight's dinner.
Yep. And then most of all, Marissa and our hope is that these 2 days have energized you, because we know we need energy these days, to raise your voices in many different places and times to help accelerate change. I loved when Jennifer Taub, I don't know if she's still here, shared that she actually kind of ended up where she is now after Celebration 55. She went home and wrote an op-ed. So we really want to see people raise their voices everywhere to make change as we continue forth. So thanks again for coming. We are going to have dinner now. You get to actually talk to each other. And then we will start the program a little bit later tonight. And our final thanks goes to Dean Manning. Thank you so much for your support of Celebration 65.
Thank you.
It's great to see you all again. I hope you've enjoyed this weekend's programs. I got to sit in on a few this afternoon. They were absolutely fantastic. Right now, I'm going to speak very briefly, and I have the great privilege of introducing our final keynote speaker, President Mary Robinson. Yes, there you go. She is, of course, a distinguished constitutional lawyer. She is a renowned supporter of human rights. She has shown through her work a deep commitment to justice, to service, and to advocacy around the globe. We're very proud that she is an alumna, an LLM from the class of 1968. So after that, from 1990 to 1997, she served as the President of Ireland and was the first woman to do so. She went on to be UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General. She has received many medals and honors, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom. President Robinson is also the president of the Mary Robinson Foundation for Climate Justice, which is a center for thought leadership, education, and advocacy on the struggle to secure global justice for people most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, the poor, the disempowered, and the marginalized. I'm almost done, but I just want to say on a personal note, my grandparents immigrated to the United States from Ireland in the early 20th century, and if they could know that I was introducing one of the presidents of Ireland tonight, they would be thrilled. And that's one of the things I love about Harvard Law School, that it enables you to live dreams that your parents and your grandparents could never have imagined. So without further delay, I welcome Mary Robinson, who will talk about women's leadership in challenging times.
Thank you very much, Dean Manning. I was so glad to be here in May and have the opportunity to see the law school that had changed so much since my visit a little bit before. But it is a great honor to speak at this dinner on the 65th anniversary of women graduating from Harvard Law School. As it was also a great honor when I spoke at lunchtime in May 2003 to mark the 50th anniversary, when we in fact celebrated the appointment of the first woman dean, Elena Kagan. On that occasion, I had a tease, and I have to do that tease again this evening. I was based in New York in 2003. I was heading up a small organization called Realizing Rights, and I was also teaching as a professor of practice at SIPA in Columbia University. And shortly before coming to Harvard for our 50th anniversary, I spoke at the 75th anniversary of women graduating in law from Columbia. So of course, I had to encourage a bit of Harvard humility, because Columbia is now marking its 90th anniversary. So, you know, everything is in proportion. And I took a cue from Dean Manning when he spoke at lunchtime about for how long people can listen. And I'm going to try and aim for that 12 minutes, which might be a bit shorter than you were expecting on the program. But actually, I love the Q&A. So if you want to have a Q&A afterwards, I'm all on. But, you know, I'm all on. We can spend time on that. My theme for this evening is women's leadership in challenging times. And these are challenging times. But maybe they are also the best of times in some sense. Before analyzing that, let me pay heartfelt tribute to what that year at Harvard Law School meant to me as a young woman embarking on exercising leadership. And I'm glad to do this just as Harvard Law School has passed its 200th anniversary. I was lucky enough to be part of the class of 1968. Is there anyone here in the room who's class of 68? Hands up, anyone? No one? I'm that old? Oh, well. But actually, at lunchtime today, we heard from each of the 3 distinguished graduates of the class of 1953 their personal story about Dean Griswold. So I'm encouraged to do so, to do the same. Dean Griswold was there only for about 6 months of my time as a law student, an LLM student here in Harvard. Unlike many of my contemporaries, I didn't meet the Grizz, as we called him, in the first few weeks of law school. And this was partly because I arrived late to the law school because the examinations for my finals in law in Trinity College, Dublin, didn't finish until the first week in September. So I was finishing and then coming a bit late. And then I almost immediately left for several days to go back to The Hague to take part in a conference on private international law. I had attended several sessions of this conference already, and I was being paid a lot of money to me in those days to take the minutes of what was being said in English at that conference. And one of the US delegates at the conference was Professor Arthur von Mehren. There must be some of you who remember Arthur von Mehren, okay? And he's actually responsible for me deciding to come to the Harvard Law School. He kindly asked what I was thinking of doing after I graduated from Trinity College, Dublin, and I said that I hoped to do postgraduate work either in Oxford or Cambridge, which was the usual path if you were lucky. And he said, why not Harvard Law School? And I very well remember saying to him, does Harvard take women? And so, but back to Dean Griswold. When I returned from The Hague to Harvard, the LLM international students had received an invitation to go and have a dinner with Dean Griswold the following evening. And, you know, I was quite excited about this. But we had to sing for our supper. Before dinner, Dean Griswold said that each of us, in alphabetical order, would state our name and our country, and then say why we decided to come to the Harvard Law School. My maiden name was Burke. I've met another Mary Burke here this evening. Where's Mary Burke? Somewhere around. And, but it so happened that there were quite a number of women with, or sorry, LLM students with names that began with A, and there were even names that began with B before mine. And everyone who spoke, they were so polite and so earnest about what they were doing and studying in Harvard and how privileged they were. And I was hearing this over and over again. And you know, when you're Irish, you can't listen to that kind of thing. Not for long. Not for long. So I made a mistake. I didn't know the Grizz. I made a big mistake. And I said that I had come to benefit from the experience of Harvard Law School. I was actually going to audit a few more courses because they teach well here in Harvard, but I was going to enjoy life and have a good time. And then I got the stare. And Dean Griswold had quite a stare. And there was silence in the room. None of my students laughed. Nobody thought it was funny. And I suddenly realized I'd made quite a mistake. But, you know, you learned. And I want to come back to that year of 1968. It was actually a very special year, in my view. Many of my American peers were criticizing what they saw as an immoral war in Vietnam. A number were planning to take part in the civil rights movement in the South and poverty programs also in the south of this country. I recall the utter devastation we felt at the assassination of Martin Luther King. The whole university stopped. We just watched on black and white television that funeral, and we were absolutely devastated. And then Robert Kennedy was assassinated just after I graduated. But what I was imbued with was a sense that young people could make a difference. And it was so unlike the Ireland of that time, where young people knew their place and waited into their 30s and into their 40s, and maybe at about 45. They could be eligible for something. And this spirit led me to challenge for a seat in the Irish Senate in 1969, when there were parliamentary elections, and I was elected at the age of 25. And it really inspired me at many moments, not least when I was elected the first woman president of Ireland, because I knew it was an advantage to be a woman doing that job, and I did it with my head held high as a woman president, and that was what I was determined to do. So now let me turn to the idea of women's leadership in challenging times, beginning with this country. President Trump's election may have seemed the worst of times, but it has triggered a huge response from women, initially in marches, and now in a wonderful array of candidates for the midterm elections. I understand that there are some 257 women already nominated successfully and running for the House and Senate seats around the country. 197 of them are Democrats, and there are more than a dozen who are female candidates for governor. That's a big change. That's a big, welcome change. The Me Too movement has enabled women to speak out and to expose the true extent of sexual harassment. We have to remember that the Me Too movement was started by a woman of color, but when the Hollywood women got in on it, it became much more known. And that's okay, because at least it became a real movement, and now this has become a global movement. At the global level, my closest reference point is women's leadership in Africa. That continent can represent the worst of times for women: conflict, rape as an instrument of war, mass displacement, early child marriage, female genital cutting, girls dropping out of education because of no help with menstrual periods, and so on. Yet, I am hugely encouraged by the women's leadership that I am seeing in many of Africa's 54 countries. And that leadership is beginning to organize on a Pan-African basis. I took part in a meeting recently in Kigali in Rwanda, which began the process of forming networks of networks involving women's leadership in Africa. Part of it is United Nations led, under Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Phumzile Mlambo Nguka, head of the UN Women, and Binta Diop, Special Envoy of the African Union on Women, Peace and Security. Part of it is led by Graça Machel on women's economic empowerment. Part of it is led by Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf, focusing on women in agriculture in particular. And part of it is young women, such as Francine Mayumba Furaha, head of the Pan-African Youth Union, and my friend Aya Chebi, founder of and chair of the Africa Youth Movement. Aya and myself took part in events in July where the elders that I belong to, the elders, as you may or may not know, were brought together by Nelson Mandela in 2007. And I was very honored and privileged to be part of this wonderful group. Our first chair was Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and we were marking the 100th anniversary of Nelson Mandela, the 100th birthday. Of course, he died a few years ago, but we had a Walk Together campaign, which you can see if you go into the Elders website, theelders.org. And we had these 100 sparks of hope, which were 100 civil society organizations that live by Mandela standards around the world. And it's a marvelous gathering of great inspiration. And we marched in the street with our chair, Kofi Annan. And it was clear that Kofi was not feeling very well. And after that, Kofi Annan and Lakhdar Brahimi and myself went to Zimbabwe because they were about to have an election at the end of July, on the 30th of July. And Kofi said, I've got a cold, I'm not really feeling very well. And he was increasingly, his voice was, he had a soft voice anyway, it was getting softer and softer. And he had to leave meetings at times, you know, because he wasn't feeling well, but he was pushing himself. And I honor the man so much, and he has been marked around the world. He died on the job, literally, because when he flew back to Zurich, and I was with him in the lounge in Johannesburg before he flew, when he flew back, he got pneumonia, and then he got complications, and he really never recovered. So he died on the job, and it's a good way to go when you're doing the kind of work he's doing, but it was also very sad. So now, let me share briefly a difficult lesson that I learned in trying to promote equality and women's voices in a conflict situation in Africa. I touched on this in the panel this morning. In 2013, I was appointed the UN Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Great Lakes in Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo. A framework for peace, security, and cooperation had been agreed between 13 African countries, 4 international institutions, including the UN and the African Union. And I called this framework a framework of hope, and said that I would work to involve civil society, and in particular women, in this process. The heads of state of the 13 countries were all male. They appointed all male representatives on the body to carry this forward, and I had to reach out to Binta Diop to be a woman involved in this in her capacity for women, peace and security in the African Union. I went out of my way to meet women's groups in the key countries. There were times in Goma and elsewhere that I actually threw the men out to get a chance to meet with the women, because it was hard to have time to meet everybody. And I knew that if I didn't meet the women separately, they wouldn't actually speak out, because they're a bit intimidated, or the men take the mic, and the men tend to feel they represent the community. And I really wanted to hear the women's voices. And we formed a women's platform of the 4 key countries, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi. And I'm glad to say that that still continues with great support from the Global Fund for Women, which was a great ally in this. But it was very difficult. I mean, even though I was told that I was the highest woman in the UN on mediation, the first mediator in a difficult conflict situation, it was very hard to get that sense of women being involved, women being at the decision-making table, women being at the table. And I said that, and I kind of joked about it on the panel today, but it's true that I managed to galvanize the women ministers of gender of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda, because they were all suspicious of me. I was a UN official. What was I doing? And they all wanted to know, so they became friends. And that was a great help to this women's platform. It won't surprise you that my final point is about women's leadership on climate change. One of the key lessons I learned was the extent of the gender dimensions of climate change. It impacts differently on women and men, particularly in developing countries, because of the different economic and social roles. In severe drought, women go further for water or firewood. In hurricanes and floods, women die in much greater numbers because they can't run fast in long skirts, and anyway, they're preoccupied with saving their children. So my foundation on climate justice helped to form a Troika Plus of women leaders on gender and climate change to influence the climate change negotiations. And we do have men as members of that Troika Plus, but we keep them in a significant minority. Men know their place on the Troika Plus of women leaders on gender and climate change. And we worked with others to bring gender into preparations for the Climate Paris Agreement, and now there's a gender action plan. But I'm not content. I'm not content at all. I'm a lucky grandmother, a lucky Irish grandmother of 6 grandchildren of our 3 children. And these 6 grandchildren will be in their 30s and 40s in 2050. They will share the world with about 9.5 billion people. We're at 7.6 billion approximately at the moment. They will share the world with 9.5 billion people. And I worry about the social cohesion and security of that world, given that we're not on course for the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement of staying well below 2 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial standards and working hard to be at 1.5 degrees Celsius so that small island states like the Marshall Islands and the Maldives don't have to go under. This has led me to try to get the message out through human stories of how those who are already coping with climate change are fighting to become resilient. So I've written a book, which is just published by Bloomsbury, called Climate Justice, Hope, Resilience, and the Fight for a Sustainable Future. And it's even led me, in my desperation, to do a podcast series. Now, a year ago, I didn't know what a podcast was, because I'm an elder. And I was encouraged, and I took a risk, because the other person involved is an Irish woman called Maeve Higgins, who's a comedian. She does a lot of podcasts. She's very well known. She does very good work, actually, with migrants in New York. She's based in New York. And Maeve and I didn't know each other before the podcast. The podcast is called Mothers of Invention. And our byline is, climate change is a man-made problem and requires a feminist solution. And it is important to emphasize that a man-made problem includes women. It's a generic term, man-made. And a feminist solution does not exclude men, including the men in this room, I think. So it is a solution based on equality, but it is tackling it from a climate justice perspective. And I have to say, we're having fun in the series. If you Google Mothers of Invention podcast, you can see all our episodes, very easy, and even bonuses. This is a world, I learned a new word, podcasts drop apparently. Did you know that? They drop. Anyway, I learned that. And which leads me to a final memory. In September 2014, there was a big march in New York before a climate change summit at the UN. And I was very pleased to see a significant number of banners on climate justice. And I was walking in a group with my fellow elder, Gru Brundtland, the mother of sustainability, the Brundtland Report, which I know a number of you would know about. But there was a very big crowd. 400,000 people had come out. And walking along, linking my arm with Gru, I saw a banner that really appealed to me. But we were so jammed together on the march, I couldn't quite get out from where we were and get behind that banner, which read, "Angry Grannies." And that is my final message, and it's a very serious message. That is what the world needs. Angry grannies, mothers, aunts, daughters, nieces, women's leadership on climate justice. We're not on course for a safe, livable world for future generations. I think I'll repeat that. We are not on course for a safe, livable world for future generations, for our children and grandchildren. And this has to become a primary women's leadership issue. So this is my appeal to you, who have shared the privilege that I've had of being graduates of the Harvard Law School. We owe it. We've had a privilege of being here. We need to give back now and really alert the world that we're on the cusp. We're on in the climate conference that I've just come from in California, they kept talking about we are close to a tipping point. When we get to that tipping point, we won't be able to reverse. We have a window of opportunity. It's as serious as that. So, sisters, angry grannies, angry daughters, thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take a few. Are we geared up? I was told we were geared up for Q&A. Okay, there's the mic. Okay. Oh, does somebody have a pen?
So you mentioned Professor Arthur von Meren.
Yes.
As getting you here. So you will hopefully be happy to know that his granddaughter was the class of 2017.
Oh, good.
She was in my section. She's not here, but she's amazing.
Well,
so hopefully she will continue that legacy.
Do tell her how much I owe Arthur.
I will.
Yeah.
I will. So my question for you is, so in Ireland, the recent constitutional referendum that happened around abortion was so inspiring to read about all the women that had expatriated from Ireland that were flying back to vote, and the energy and the enthusiasm around that specific issue. And so my question to you is, first, what can we learn domestically from that energy and from that enthusiasm and that momentum? And then also, sort of as we approach these global issues, not just in the developing world, but also in the developed world, what are your recommendations as a woman that has truly a global perspective as what we can do, both from the United States and our position as global leaders?
Thank you. That's a really interesting question. I am so proud of my country at the moment. I really am. We had 2 referenda, as you will recall. The first was on same-sex marriage. I had taken a case to Strasbourg on that issue years before, and I actually had the pleasure as president of signing into law a bill that removed all the discrimination. But this was different. This was a referendum of the people of Ireland about same-sex marriage. Why did it gain such support, not in the cities and not in the rural areas? It was right across the country. Every county in Ireland voted in favour of same-sex marriage a couple of years ago, except Roscommon, one county. And Roscommon kept his head down after that. It was because it became an issue, not just of women, of young women and men. It became a people's issue for that generation. And I can't tell you how they canvassed. They wouldn't give up on anyone. They talked to everyone about people they knew that were gay. It became a familiar thing. One of my successor, Mary McAleese, came out and said her son was gay. That helped. Media people came out. And became a family thing. And how can you discriminate when you know that people love each other and want to marry? I mean, come on, etc. You know, it became that kind of issue. And a lot of young people came back to Ireland to vote. And we saw them coming into the airport. We actually visibly saw. And they were greeted with banners. And they came back at their own expense. Now, I know you're registering people. I hope some of you are registering people to vote in the midterm elections. And, you know, frankly, your voting in this country is disgracefully low. Disgracefully low. And here were the Irish young people coming back at their own expense, not just from Britain. I know one Australian young man who came back from Australia. He made it a holiday, but he came back to vote. Even more difficult, much more difficult, was the removal of the constitutional provision which equated the life of the mother and the life of the unborn. As an Irish senator in the 80s, I had opposed that. It was put in '83, and I did a filibuster in the Senate. I did everything I could to prevent that. I didn't have to say anything in the current discussion because that was all viral. A debate that had taken place with myself and a famous professor of law who was patronizingly trying to put me down when I was saying this will raise all kinds of difficulties. Anyway, the point is, I had given up on that issue. I had kind of thought to myself, you know, we're stuck with it. If only the courts will interpret it in some kind of liberal way, but it's difficult. And we had terrible court cases and terrible deaths of women. the Irish young people did not give up on it. They did not give up on it. They talked to everyone. They talked to their grandparents, they talked to their mothers, and they came back in the same way, the same movement, in order to secure that vote. It was devastating for the Catholic Church in Ireland, which obviously was on the wrong side of that issue, that they had lost the young people in the country on that issue. And again, every county in Ireland voted significantly for removing the ban on abortion, except Donegal. It's always one county that doesn't. But, you know, to me that was amazing. I'm not sure that I can really give recommendations at this stage. Take all this on board and think about it. You know, think about it. This certainly has really resulted in a very high morale in Ireland at the moment. And luckily our economy is doing quite well. We just have a neighbour who's having a problem called Brexit. I don't want to talk about that. Yep.
I am Margarita Kearney, the class of 2005, and I'm an environmental lawyer, so first I just want to say thank you. And one of the things that I've noticed in my work is that climate change is such a charged word. And so when talking to different diverse groups of people with diverse backgrounds and interests, you tend to find different ways of talking about it that might resonate with them. So with some groups you might say, think about the change in weather and national security. With other groups you talk about the importance of taking care of God's earth. I'm wondering if there's, if you've noticed a language that resonates with women when you're talking about climate change.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. We talk a lot about the need for a new narrative and a more positive narrative, that we have the great potential to move much more rapidly to clean energy. And think for the 1 billion people who have no access to electricity in our world in the 21st century, what a difference it'll make to them, what a difference in their household, what a difference for children doing study at night, clinics for safe motherhood, safe birth, etc., etc., etc. I go a long way with the need for a narrative that is compelling, and that's why I'm doing the book with stories, that's why I'm doing the podcast with a bit of humor. But at the end of the day, we have to talk about climate change, because climate is changing, and human activity is causing it. And I don't like when people use euphemisms about human rights, including women's rights. We have to talk about these things bravely and courageously and openly and honestly. But we also have to communicate better. Is that it? If I don't see any other hand, if nobody... Oh, here, there's a hand there. Last question. I don't like to be too angry, to be honest. You know, let me answer that question with something I've learned from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And I've shared this a lot, but I'd love to share it with you this evening because it means so much to me. I was on a panel with Archbishop Desmond Tutu as an elder, and he was the chair of the elders at the time. We were in New York at a social good conference. And the social good conferences are young people who come together. UN Foundation brings them together quite a lot, and they're all on their social media, on their phones and their iPads and so on. And you get a big bang for your buck in the sense of you get a big feedback from what's been said at these things. So it's a good event to go to. And Archbishop Tutu, when he's in front of young people, becomes very excitable and giving and loving. And he tells them how wonderful they are and what hope he has and how they encourage him, and his arms are going in every direction. And we were being moderated by a United States journalist, a CNN journalist. And she said, quite sharply, she said, "Archbishop Tutu, why are you such an optimist?" And he looked at her and he shook his head and he said, "Oh no, dearie, I'm not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope." And, you know, that made me think. We all need to be prisoners of hope, because that means you're going to find not that the glass is half full, but that there's enough in the glass to work with. And that's the important thing. That's the important thing. So I'll leave you with that.
Madam President, listening to you, I'm reminded of the words of another head of state. Jinnah, who founded Pakistan, once said, "There are two powers in the world. One is the sword, and the other is the pen. There is a great competition and a rivalry between the two. But there is a third power, stronger than both, and that is of woman. And that is you." So as we all know, raising our voices is the clarion call, the rallying cry for Celebration 60. On your inauguration, President Mary Robinson said, "As a woman, I want women to be written back into history. Women must find voice where they find a vision." So President Robinson told us that she was proud to be a woman president. But I want to go further and say, no, she was a president for women. She was a women's president. She was our president. She was not just a woman president, but she was a women's president. What she didn't tell us was that, as Isabel reminded us about the referendum to end the abortion ban, that really revolutionized Ireland, but its genesis lay in a bill, a private member bill that Senator Robinson brought at the age of 25 as the first act as a senator. And this was a bill to amend the law on family planning in Ireland to allow the sale of contraceptives, when the sale of contraceptives was banned. And this was a criminal offense. And like all of the Herculean tasks that lawyer Robinson, the law professor Robinson, the Senator Robinson, and the President Robinson undertook, she met with stiff opposition. The Archbishop said that it was a curse upon our country. And the bill never even achieved a first reading, but it did create the first tremors. And as we know, in 2018, just a few months ago, Ireland voted to end the abortion ban, and Mary Robinson was the founding mother of that movement. But what was the finest moment for Harvard was when she said, "I did that because I learned from my classmates at Harvard Law that there were no boundaries to what we could seek to achieve. And that what my law school classmates taught me was that a real sense of values was worth fighting for, and worth even failing in that fight." So I want to end with looking at Mary Robinson's newest book, which is a call to action, a call to arms. As she said, it is a feminist solution to a man-made problem. It is a book about storytelling, narratives about building unlikely coalitions between women farmers and women litigators fighting for climate justice. And Celebration 65 too embodies that same manifesto. It is a call to action on women's leadership and gender equality, the unfinished business of the 21st century. As Dean Manning said, Harvard is a place for ideas, But the idea of gender equality is long past time. And as we look back on this magical night, on this enchanted evening, I want to go back to President Robinson's own inspiration, that of her favorite poet, Seamus Heaney. I want to read out just a few lines from his Republic of Conscience, which she often quotes. And it so sums up our time, but it also provides a path forward for our next generation of women leaders. From the Republic of Conscience, at their inauguration, public leaders must swear to uphold unwritten law and weep to atone for their presumption to hold office. Although those are sobering thoughts, I want to end with a more uplifting tone. President Robinson often quotes from her friend, the former Wangari Maathai, the Nobelist. And these are such apt words today, especially to young women leaders at Harvard Law, who all stand on the shoulders of Mary Robinson, and they are her intellectual heirs. So Mary Robinson often quotes her friend, Wangari Maathai, who said at the United Nations, "In the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach a higher moral ground, a time when we have to shed our fears and give hope to each other. That time is now. This is a time of profound shifts. So we call upon all of you, our sisters at Celebration 65, to seize that mantle of change now. This is our time. This is the time for women."